What's going on, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to Gin and Tantra, Spirituality with a Twist. We have Daniel driving the ship tonight, co-piloted by one Katie Petersen. Katie, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So, we're in our kind of like new phase here where we have our other contributors coming on, and so I'm happy to be having these conversations with actually good friends of mine. So it's nice to have meaningful conversations that we can prep and do. So, kind of the lead in for our conversation today and maybe next time as well is specifically grief and grief around relationships specifically. So we will begin with kind of just a discussion on grief in general, work through the stages of the grief, and then add in some personal stories and anecdotes along the way. So if that's suitable for you, then buckle up and hang on for the ride. If not, then click away to
Turn
another.
it up.
Yeah, go to a cat video. You know.
Don't lose
Um,
me now.
yeah.
Cat videos offered. I'm in.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So I want to begin our
Uh-oh,
discussion.
did we freeze? We're
No.
back.
Yeah. So I want to begin our discussion from a kind of Chinese medical slash Taoist perspective. And I found this to be quite interesting from myself when I learned it. And so, just as a disclaimer, anytime you talk with an acupuncturist or somebody who studies Taoism, they may have similar ideas on things, but it's going to be explained differently. So, for our Chinese medical folks, who are listening to this podcast, if I sound different than the book or different than some of your professors, or even if you took class with me and I sound different now than when I was giving the lecture a year ago, that's just how it goes because there's always different levels of understanding as it is with everything. So there's kind of five elements that exist in Taoism, and kind of inside baseball here, I got Katie to sign up for a Taoist a dying course focused in Taoism, and so she is now excitedly, but perhaps reluctantly, taking this class with me. So it'll be good. Well, by the time we're
Okay,
finished,
hold on. I am
yeah.
all about death in the dark forest,
Okay.
all about it. I
Okay.
do a lot of work with people in deep grieving states. So this
Yes.
really did speak to me the conceptually, but to his point about the hesitation, it is very much for acupuncturists, which I am not. So there's a lot of
Yes.
meridian points and things that I don't understand. And I
Yes.
don't
Yes.
know how much I'm going to not understand over the next 9 months. But
Yeah, but it's gonna be good.
that's
Um,
that.
okay, so there's five elements: fire, earth, metal, water, and wood. And we've had Rory on here before, who's done a really nice job of breaking some of those down. And we've talked about doing a series on them, but we just never got around to it. But specifically, I'm going to talk about the kind of soul overall. And I've done this before on the show, but we'll do it again now. And so the soul, or we're going to call it the Shen in Chinese medicine, is broken up into kind of five parts. Um, and each part is associated with a different element. So the wood element is associated with the dreaming body, and the earth element is associated with the kind of like mental thinking body. The water element is associated with kind of like the wisdom body, but you can also correlate it to like our genetic material. And the metal element in particular, the one that we're going to focus on now, is associated with the physical body. It's known in Chinese as the Po. They call this the corporeal body, or we could just call it like our soma. And the interesting thing for me in comparing those elements to each other is that the Po, or the metal element, or our soma, is the only one that does not really move on to the next life. And because of that, and because it's most associated with the material aspect of our being, it is very much, I could say, aware of its own finite nature. And given that it is the metal element, it is associated with the lungs and the large intestine. So it's in charge of respiration, right? Inhaling and exhaling. It's also in charge of, newsflash, poop. And so it is in charge of getting rid of waste. Again, very material things. When you're a spirit, you don't need to breathe. You also don't need to shit either. So these are kind of very human things. And therefore it's very ingrained in the day-to-day kind of activities of life. It also is aware on some level of its own decay. The other dreaming body and the mental body, they can go off and think about things and make plans and have dreams, and they're not bound to your physical body, but the rest of you totally is. And so given that it's has a quote unquote awareness of its own finite nature, it is the most unwilling to let go. It has the hardest time letting go. And so, because of this, we have a hard time letting go because we feel it so deeply. And the emotion that is associated with that is grief. And so, because grief is the I guess you could say the emotional side of letting go, the difficulty in letting go. That's the feeling that comes up. That's how we describe it. It's just like recoil from something being, from us giving something up or something,
Lost.
yeah, lost. There you go. And so it is this part of us that has the hardest time letting go because it is such a real thing for it. It is the one that feels it most deeply. And it's a very physical feeling, and thereby it has a very emotional component to it because it comes from the body and it is part of us. And we are all aware that our time here is not infinite. And so, anytime that we have a loss, whether it be the physical loss of a loved one, they pass away, whether it be unexpectedly or even expectedly or whatever, we feel that if it's a loss, and how we're going to tailor our conversation here moving forward of a friendship or a relationship, those those losses feel very similar because those people are no longer in our lives, just like the people who we lose who pass away. And so it becomes almost similar. It's a reminder to us of our finite nature. And if people can slip into a state of depression, you can also be reminded in a negative sense, perhaps of our own isolation or our own perceived isolation once we are embodied in this, because we go from a state of being an infinite potential soul, if you will, or Shen, undifferentiated, to a relatively differentiated being who is driving around this human form with two arms and two legs and one head. And so this is a very deep thing for us. It's a very difficult, um, I say, experience and topic to kind of discuss because it is so, I don't know, so ephemeral, so corporeal, if you will. Does that make sense? I want to give you a chance to say a few words here, Katie.
Yeah, I mean, it all makes sense. I feel there's the idea of we're here to experience that, that these energies have found this, space of this locus
Mm,
space
mm,
to to experience the corporeal being. And with that, it's how these frequencies now hit this nature of containment. And I find it a very beautiful experience, and call it like the terrifyingly beautiful, or the beautifully awful. It's always a little bit of both, and if you can be in the both and, it's a lot better than the either or.
yeah,
But even just going to the, slipping into depression, I feel the language of, a lot of times for myself, I feel this, especially in grieving processes or deep emotional states that have gone to a different state of where I am.
yeah,
I feel the language of, I am depressed. My body is depressing right now. That's better said. Not I'm depressed, but I am depressing. There's a slowdown that's necessary for me to process things, for
mm,
me to just be, for me to allow waves and stagnancies and everything in between that I don't know what's there because I'm doing my everything I'm supposed to do. But if
mhm,
I allow what it is, not that we can't then continue to depress ourselves, to
yeah,
your point with
yeah,
isolation, but sometimes that feeling, when I first feel it, it's very sweet and sad. It's like
sure.
I'm supposed to slow down because I've got to process some emotions that I'm not allowing to come up. And this body has to do this to be
Mm,
here in a very clear way.
mm. And I mean, even in the generating cycle, so, there's like fire, earth, metal, water, and wood. After metal, right, we talked about this kind of corporeal body. The next cycle is the water cycle, and the water cycle is associated, with sadness. That is the natural.
Mm,
So it's the natural facet of life to let go of these things and then move into a seed state, essentially, right? Because water is
mm-hmm,
like probably the closest thing that we have to an infinite source of potentiality, right? Like everything comes from water, you know? And so you move into that water phase, and then things arise, seeds arise from that, life arises from that. When we look for life on other planets, what are we looking for? We're not looking for actual beings. We're looking for water because that's the beginning. Metal is the end, water is the beginning. So this stage of
Mm.
sadness, how you're talking about, is kind of the place where we collect, because that's what water wants to do. It wants to collect. It wants to, remain with itself, versus fire, which fire
And it
needs
wants to move. I feel that the
for sure.
idea of water, if it's stagnated, well, that's where bacteria grows.
Right?
So if
Yeah.
we're not moving and through water, it doesn't get to produce life. We
Yeah.
get stuck. We live the same year for 10 years.
Yeah. Yes. So
A
yeah,
different kind of grief. You can't get to the grief. You don't even know what the pain is.
yeah. Yeah. So it's a, but that's so, but to your point, yes. I mean, there is a natural kind of movement from that to that, from grief to sadness. That's kind of the thing. I mean, and just, kind of talking about this sort of stages of grieving, if you will. I wanted to bring this up. And so, I wanted to kind of go over this, and then we can certainly talk about it. The stages of grief. And so I have them here. Now, when I first went over this a long time ago in college as a, a psychology undergrad for, a year or so, I learned the stages of grief as like stages. It seems like, oh, they're going to go in this order, but actually they don't have to go in any order. They can be
I'm
in,
done.
right, right. It's like so anyways, so the stages of grief,
And they'll probably repeat themselves too. They're
yeah,
very cyclical on top of each other.
definitely. So they can occur in any order, but they are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Now, we'll break those down here, but the two there's two more that I kind of wanted to talk about in addition to this. One is before you even go into a grief stage, whichever one you're in, I think apprehension is there. I think there's an apprehensiveness that, and you could tell me what you think about this. I believe that there's an apprehensiveness that we have in order to avoid going even to start the grief cycle before we do the breakup, before we say goodbye, before we let the thing go, quit the job or whatever. You don't want to go there. There is a hesitance, A, for
It's the
change.
ground rattling apart, and you can
Yes.
feel the tectonic plates shifting.
Yes.
Right when you said apprehension, I felt the word resistance, and not in a bad way. Resistance can be very safe sometimes. It can be the thing you need to do for a minute to get to the place you need to be. But
Yeah.
if you don't get stuck doing it too long. So I think that you're right. But I would also still kind of say that precedes the grief cycle.
Yeah.
It's just, it's part of life, but it's not part of that grief set. It's the preceding thing that you
Yes.
don't really get to get away from.
Yes. Yeah,
Because an
exactly.
accident kind of happen, like a massive car accident that has no expectation. Well, that rattling probably happens, but it's right before the car hits.
Correct.
So there's,
Yeah.
there things can happen on a super accelerated scale.
Yeah, definitely. And then the last one that I have yet to read this book, so, but I think I'm going to, um, the last stage of grief, they call it the sixth stage of grief, and that's the name of this book, the sixth stage of grief. They call it Finding Meaning, and I'll go into that here, in a minute once we finish the rest of these. But I saw that as I was doing this, and I was like, oh, I like that because that's the ramp. That's the ramp. That's the way out, you know? This is the
Mm.
silver lining. This is the lesson. You know what I'm saying? That is there for you or for whoever.
It's the way through. I saw something about just sadness. Maybe it's used that word versus grief, but it had like images with like, balls, but it was like the grief doesn't get smaller. It stays the same size, but you build a life around it and it had like other balls around it.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's like there's always a, loss there. But even as I say it, I'm thinking of, the tree shedding its leaves in fall. And I always just pictured like, okay, the beautiful dead leaf, it served its purpose, blah, blah, blah. But over the last couple of years, I read something where it said, the entire tree is imprinted in the leaf, the entire tree. And
Mm,
so, like, every part of the tree left with that was something exceptional for me. I don't know why that resonated that process so much differently, but the changing, the letting go, it's like that it's always part of you. It's like in every dimension, probably part of you in different ways. It's part of your tree.
yeah.
But that's part of what also let go and also has parts of you always with it back into the ground, right?
Well, that is it's interesting. We'll kind of harken back to earlier. So the fall season is the season of the metal element, and the trees are kind of like the
Hmm.
earth's lungs, And so when the leaves drop, it shows the movement of the energy back to the core, like during, in preparation for hibernation. But I like that how the entire imprint of the tree is in every leaf because that's I mean, for me, from my mind, that's the definition of a soul.
Yeah, yeah, the embodiment.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. Okay, so real quick on this stages of grief, right? So denial often is a defense mechanism. You refuse to accept things. There's, it's not, it's, yeah, you're numb to it. I found those to be kind of like the two most extreme. You just ignore it, or you're like, nah, nah.
I think numbing is a coping mechanism
Yeah,
of denial. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And then there's the bargaining one, which is what we were talking about before we started recording. People dwell on what they could have done differently, and the other
Or
one,
bargain that they're going to do it differently in the future and get it back.
they're right. And so they
If
talk.
it's
So they
not
have
a
this.
death.
They have this written down. They call it bargaining with a higher power, which from in
Hmm.
psychological, I guess, discussions is an odd thing to have written down in Western biological or Western psychological discussions. Depression, I think we know what depression is. Acceptance, we know what acceptance is. And the last one I think that I want to just chat on here for a moment is the finding
I
meaning
kind of
part.
want to go back if we're allowed to go back.
Go back, yeah. Hello. Yes,
Question.
you.
So just going back to acceptance, I think there's it's such a multifaceted piece that will speak back into the other parts, like acceptance of the way you were in it too, not just, or acceptance of the other, not acceptance of just the loss and the break and the, you know, pieces at the end, but acceptance of all the parts and
Mm,
the whole tree.
yeah, is a good
And
point.
that acceptance is actually possible to really just be pure love at that point because it's just I love this whole thing now.
Mm,
It's I had to see all the pieces, but it's I think acceptance is a very layered, rooted out thing that's happening or needs to continue to happen. And sometimes we just glaze into the okay, accept that this is a loss and now I'm moving on, but
mm.
kind of skip some of those layers of what might still need our attention or love.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think acceptance is almost inevitably one of the last stops along the way, right? Because without that, then you're probably in one of those denial phases, to be honest. It's hard to accept things that you are not acknowledging, right?
Yeah, and well, yes, I agree that is one place that can happen and might happen, but I am thinking even of ways that I might have judged myself in my last relationship based on how he wanted to point something out, and so I'm stuck in that judgment of myself. And then somehow, somewhere it blows open because a group of people or a friend or a close one accepts me as that. And I'm like, oh, well, I can accept me as that, or I
Mm,
don't have to keep judging myself for that. And it's just things that have sprung from the relationship, but a relationship is how you then are in relationship with yourself, with other people. So I think
yeah.
there's parts of me that I get to continuously keep learning and growing and accepting, not being in denial of all the, things that have happened and all that relationship aside, but the parts of me that now I'm only in relationship to, I get to continue to change that story because that reflection isn't saying that's wrong. And a lot of these others are saying you get to be you and that's okay. And even when
Mm,
you're kind of like nippy or short or we love you.
right. The
And I get
acceptance
to
of you.
re-accept myself in that versus try to shape and mold to be something that isn't natural or authentic in that moment. And myself, but I might be snippy.
Right. Well,
And it's
yeah.
okay to be that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just think it can marry out in a lot of ways and also go backwards in a lot of ways.
Sure.
So
Well,
anyway,
yeah. I
next
mean,
stage.
yeah. I mean, but these things, they don't, they're not in any particular order. It's right. It's just as you
Yeah.
move on. I mean, arguably, after you deny things, you have to accept that they occurred in order for you to go through the anger and depression and bargaining and so on and so they're
And I think that's what the psychology books are putting it to, is like accepting that totally. I just
yeah,
like
yeah,
to dig layers.
I hear you. Um, but I do think then when you go through them and then the way out is defining meaning, pulling the kind of
Mhm.
pieces from these experiences through you. And like I talked about in the beginning of this, like grief is one of the hardest. Grief, accepting loss, accepting change, accepting uncertainty because you have to let go of something in order to move to something else is, I don't know. I mean, I can't say the hardest thing for us to do, but it's very difficult for everyone to do, because we are embodied,
Yes.
because it's an archetypal sensation that just gets triggered so hard. And we are also communal beings, regardless of how isolated we are now with technology and whatever. We are communal beings. We have been for far more than society has been around. So we are wired to be around other people all the time. And when we lose that, it's a death. Even if someone doesn't die, it's a death with that we have to accept and grieve and do
You
that
mean when
within
like
ourselves.
someone is severed from your sense of
Yes.
community?
Yes.
Yeah. And
Yes.
I think we're as a species
Yes.
or just, in our culture is probably what I can actually speak to. There's just we're ill-equipped. Everyone I've worked with, when I was first kind of pulled in to work with someone in a, bereavement process, I didn't know if I was equipped. And she was like, "You're the only person I actually want to talk to." All her friends were so sweet, but they're like, "It's gonna get better. It's gonna get," everyone wanted to make the light happen and pull her out of it. And I was the only one that would sit with her and hold her hand in the dark forest and say, "You're here. We're going to be here for a second." And
Yeah.
that's okay. And going back to the finding meaning part, I I don't know, maybe I'm just interpreting it differently than it's supposed to be, or it's just another way of looking at it. I'm not hearing or even, receiving that as finding meaning in the relationship and oh, it all happened for a reason because this, which I hope there's that. But I guess the way I'm taking it in, and this could be incorrect, is well, the way through grief is to be in your life continuously and finding meaning in your life. Forget finding meaning from what happened or from the loss or from the, person, like, and how that's imprinting to some degree. Like that's always already almost oversaturating the
Sure.
framework of the brain at that point. So, and I could be wrong, but I feel it as like finding meaning in like how am I putting my foot down in the world right now?
Well, so
Not
what
like as a legend you're creating, but like what's my next step to feel good in my life now?
Yeah, so what again, I have not had a chance to read the book. I just found out about it like 2 days ago, but I did watch about a 20-minute TED Talk with the author where they did a Q&A with the audience. And what he said is that there's a few kind of pieces to this. So finding meaning, first of all, is that it's relative to you. So
Yeah.
whatever it is, it's your meaning, whether that is from the relationship or whether that is for your life or whatever. It has to be specific for you. So there's not like a prescriptive thing. Oh, this is the meaning or whatever, right? So
Right. It could be finding faith,
yeah, yes,
something deeper and bigger beyond the thing that you've tunnel visioned in with
yeah,
him. Hmm.
yep. Um, and like the other thing he said that it does take time, and that time is different for everybody. So it could be months, could be years. Um,
Hmm.
understanding, and I like this part. It says understanding is not required. Understanding of why things occur. So, like you said, like yes, this is life. This is how it happens. We move on, so on and so forth. That doesn't have to be a necessary. It's not necessary to have that understanding in order to find meaning out of this experience. But that is also we have to accept that loss on all fronts is a part of life, and that the last piece, meaningful relationships, are very helpful.
Hmm.
And we were talking about community, and when he said that, I was like, oh yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And the one piece of the talk that he said that I really liked. He's like, there's a lot of discussion today around like post-traumatic stress. He's like, but what there is not a lot of discussion around is post-traumatic growth. And that is the finding meaning piece for him. And the author,
Define post-traumatic growth. I'm
so again, post-traumatic growth for him was the ability to take the meaning from the experience that you had with loss
okay. Okay.
and to be strengthened by it. And specifically, like before we started recording, you and I were talking. He talked about like building strength around the loss. So if you feel like there's a hole, okay, where somebody once resided, that you can fill the entirety around that hole with other relationships or other understanding or other meaning or some things that have value and still honor the space where that person was because they will
A
never
really
be
good way to
totally
put it.
filled.
Yeah, you're not filling in the space. And it kind of goes back to the little like image I saw. Like the ball stays the same size,
Yes,
but you fill around it. And
correct.
yeah, I think like from my deepest stage with grief and longest, the thing that I really rose into almost on accident, and I was kind of buffered in a beautiful way with COVID. I shouldn't have dated. I wanted to be alone. I wanted to really process the entire experience fully and process my grief. But that said, when I did start finding some community during a time, where we're all isolating, I just showed up a little differently. I just
Sure.
talked about it. I didn't I just was
Right.
super vulnerable, but without an edge of like, I'm crying about it. I was just like very honest, authentic, owning my part in it,
Yeah.
say, not bashing the person, like, but really mostly authentically owning my part because I'm the person in front of you guys. But so, yeah, I think it was one of the first steps in me feeling really, I don't know, alive in myself as this being who deserves to be here.
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Um,
and boundaries I wouldn't have never like really
Crossed.
thought. Yeah, like just I think living in boundaries, that sounds so imprisoned, but living within boundaries that are like I just my yes and my no became so clear. That's probably the best way to put it.
Yeah.
And it didn't have to be challenged or defended in such a way. It was just like I just felt my nature differently. And I think it
Sure.
was part of really facing the grieving process with such a tenderness and grit. And then also only showing up in community when I was ready for that. Like that was the thing that I had to build around the whole. But like that's how I started showing up. And then
Yeah.
I, not that I wasn't authentic before, but you get it. You see different versions of yourself that are just like slightly expanded out from the last little
Yeah. Well,
Russian doll.
there's inevitable personal change when we have to fill a space that was once held by another. And in the filling of that space and the growth that goes along with it, we will be introduced to a more fuller version of ourself because we are, I'm not going to say like acquiescing to someone else, but I'll say adapting to our partners, which is what you're referring to at this point, is the end of a romantic partnership. And I
Hmm.
mean, ultimately, that's where this conversation is going to go. We're just kind of setting the stage in terms of talking about grief as the foundation to a larger conversation about grief and relationships. But I wanted to give the kind of background on grief in general. But, as we do experience that loss, whether it be, in this case, a romantic partnership or with the loss of a person via the death process, they're no longer there in our life. If I like to
Hmm.
imagine that we have um our personalities are similar to like spices in a dish or in a soup or a stew, whatever. And when you put two spices together, they have a certain flavor profile that goes along with both of them. And then when you remove one, the other one it stands up more. You taste that more.
I like that imagery to that.
If I just
Hmm.
have
Hmm.
spice, it's very spicy. If I have cayenne, and if I have cayenne and honey, then it's like a hot honey. right? But if I remove the honey and I only have cayenne, well, now that's the flavor that I'm going to work with. And I'm going to have to find that it's not just spicy, there's an aromatic quality to it also, and I wouldn't have tasted that before because it was moderated by the sweetness of the honey you know? So this is how I believe we are, like you said, you're growing when you're interacting with other people or other spices in the analogy that I'm giving. And you are finding the ways in which that you can express your own natural flavors in these environments.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think even in going back to what you said about acquiescing or adapting, like, you kind of both do. And like
Yeah.
when, cayenne and honey first separate, you still have a little bit of cayenne on
Yeah.
the honey and honey, and so there's still that kind of like amalgamation of something that you just keep kind of distilling and purifying. And,
Mm,
my partner, I still have tons of similarities and, or former partner. Oops. But that said, like, it's so much who we are as separate people, and then you're sure, like it's there's pieces that I can just go back and love him differently in, because I'm like, this is me too.
right.
But we magnify that in each other, but like they're kind of cute qualities. But whatever it is, like I just think that I like the spice analogy in that way, because
Yeah.
it's a you find your purification and then you're more you. And just going back to what you were saying about community, that is going to kind of be ever changing and ever cycling, because people get close and they move and whatever.
Yeah.
But like that authenticity and that like bright cumin I was showing up in was like, eventually those are the closest relationships I've ever had, some of them, the
Hmm.
few, like the most deep. And that I don't know, when you're with your partner, you can't necessarily find that in the same way. And
Yeah.
now, like, no, that every partner that could now come in is going to compare off of something that
Yeah.
has brightened. And the grief process was such a big part of that. That's who I shared it with, that's who
Hmm.
held me in it and I held. And
Yeah.
that's a different life death cycle that I've now lived with humans that I love. And someone's got to come up real strong against that to, you know get time at the table.
Well, I mean, if it's a competition, yes, but if not, they'll bring their own and they will create
Not in
something
a bad
different.
way, not in a competing way, but like, but that's, I want that strength. I want that brightness of partner to come in, that, to your point, you're going through the loss, but you're also becoming more yourself. It's the post-traumatic growth process. And it's
Hmm.
not like a better person or someone who's going to treat me right. I don't mean any of that.
Right.
I just mean someone who's more
A match.
congruent to my spice that I am in now,
Sure.
my flavor profile,
Yeah.
my diversity of spices that I am.
Mm.
I'm a seasoning.
Yes. Yes, you are.
Oh,
Um, so I have a little bit, I have a little a paragraph here from a early 20th century French writer named Marcel Proust, or if you're speaking it properly, Marcel Proust, because he's French.
that's good.
Thank you.
Good job.
Um, so he's a very interesting guy. They even had a game show in, I don't know if it was the 30s, or maybe in the 50s. Define Marcel Proust in 15 seconds. That was the game show.
The
And
whole show.
yeah, that was the show. And it was like, whatever, $30,000 if you could do it. And you couldn't. He's a very enigmatic writer, very interesting
Like the
character.
most interesting man in the world,
Yeah, except
giving
for the
those
fact that
vibes.
he's like super sick and bedridden, but yet still manages to go out parties. He only drinks like milk and coffee. He's an interesting character.
My kind of guy. Graham
He-
crackers, milk, and coffee.
that's it. He's got it. Um, and so, anyways, I was reading this kind of like primer about him that had some pieces of information, some of his pieces in it and some descriptions of his stuff. And I just ran across this maybe about a week ago talking about grief because he is such a sickly person. He's like, why would we focus on being happy? We should really focus more on being operational while we're sad because we spend a lot more time being sad than we do being happy. It seems like a better use of our time.
Very Ayn Rand of him.
So
But yes, 100%. I
that's
am super operational when I'm sad. I've worked on this
yeah.
for
So
chill.
that's a Proustian way of thinking. Um, and so he talks about the grieving about grief in particular, and and then he asks, this is not a direct quote, but it's my kind of sharing of it, right? And he's asked the reader like, why is it that we have been abandoned, which is this feeling of grief, right? Because you've been left, okay? And in the context of
Mhm.
relationships, that's where this came from. But again, we're talking about grief as a whole for right now. Um, and he says that we identify the reasons for our discomforts, although this doesn't absolve us from our pain, but it can form the basis for recovery. How? When you have understanding, it is assuring us that we are not uniquely cursed. And I liked that because the word that stands out to me in this was uniquely. Because when
Mhm.
you believe that you are uniquely cursed, you are special. You are different. This is happening to you and you only. And when you have understanding around grief, understanding around grief. Now, whether that understanding, if we go back just a few minutes, whether that understanding is the acceptance part or the finding meaning part in our stages of grief, I can't say. It doesn't fit exactly. But what I can say is that that understanding helps us to change our perspective so that we understand that this is happening to everyone. It doesn't make our suffering any less, but it does put it into perspective that this is not specific to us. This is a product of being alive. And I think that helps. And so I know as a practitioner, when I'm in the clinic with somebody and I try and provide this understanding or like a philosophy to say, okay, these are some archetypal experiences based on what you're describing. Again, it's just to put it into perspective for people that like you're not alone in this. And the anecdotal story I have, which we could talk about for a moment. I had a patient probably about a year and a half ago who came in and I worked with her for a few times, and she was coming in because she had about the 10-year anniversary from uh, a, a child that was born and passed away after like a day.
So full term. Yeah.
Yeah. And, it was still, 10 years later, and she's
Hmm.
coming in to get treatment because she's still with it, and I totally understand. And she told me about this, because she just was started crying one day, and I was like, this is where's this coming from, And so I just she stopped talking, and I just sort of sat for a moment, and I said, okay, what would an indigenous society, what do I believe an indigenous society would do at a miscarriage or a death of a young infant? Well, they would probably, my guess, the women would grieve together. That would be my guess. Specifically on a miscarriage, maybe the whole unit, the whole tribe as like an infant, but specifically a miscarriage. And my guess is, again, this is just me. This is the vision that I had, that they would go to the forest, do a ritual, bury it, and then cry together and then sing, and then that would be forever remembered. This would be the tree or this is the spot or whatever. They would do something because I feel like there is not a lot of grieving rituals that occur in our culture, specifically around miscarriages. When you have a full-term child, you can bury it, you have a thing, but when you have a miscarriage, it affects lots of women for sure. And it's a relationship that you have not just with this unborn being, but it's a relationship that you have with the idea and the hopes and the projections for what this being might be for itself and for
You
you
built your whole life.
and your whole life. Exactly.
But I mean, hers not being a miscarriage, they still get it's still not enough. That's the first woman I worked with when she lost her fiance. like we did rituals in the forest, and it
Yeah.
wasn't just all like letting go of him. It was a lot of ways bringing in meaning into her
Yeah.
life. But like I felt like really deeply, this person needs to connect with the land, and we need a bigger nervous system what the two of us are. But that said, miscarriage has such a secretive, hide it, don't share it. It's a totally, not that she didn't have, enough of what she needed. She probably didn't. But when you go to miscarriage versus even bringing to term, it's even weirder. It's
Yeah.
even more hidden. It's
Yeah.
even, you don't talk about it. A
Correct.
lot of times people never know you're pregnant.
Yeah.
And it's a loss that you just don't ever really get to process until you're processing it in weird
Yeah.
places.
Yeah. No, it's true.
Yeah.
And since she has come, I have had a number of patients who have had miscarriages within the last year or two, and
Hmm.
they carry it around. Literally, they carry the feeling around. Uh, Shamanic story. I was teaching an introductory shamanic course some years ago, maybe 3 years ago now. And in one of the, meditation sessions, journeying sessions, myself and one of the other assistants I had there saw a vision of this woman with something around her and, some kind of spirit, if you want. And we then took her aside after the class was over and we said, "Hey, uh, did you ever have like a miscarriage or an abortion?" She said, "Yes, I had a later miscarriage some time
Hmm.
ago. She was on vacation, she was pregnant, and then it happened." We saw that on her 15 years
Yeah,
later.
in her field.
Yes, yes, still
And
there.
it kind of goes back to something I said before. Like we're all part of the same, that's part of her tree. And
Yeah,
on some dimension, that's her mother. And on some dimension, that's her, kid. But like that's part of her tree.
but part of that tree has to be let go. And
Yes.
that's
Yes.
the
That's a
thing that
that's a
it's
leaf that is crumbly. Hmm.
correct. That is a leaf that is crumbly that needs to be pulled off the tree so that a new leaf can grow, you know?
Right.
And
Right.
that
Like,
was
but
the
that energetic, that frequency, that imprint to me is still going to be in the field, but it's not like what you guys saw.
yes.
It then just gets to fill her heart and
Yes,
space.
it's still right, right.
Hmm.
But the point is that even though this thing, we asked her,
Yeah.
the wild part for me is that we said, we can help you process this, but we have to have your permission. She said no.
It's hard to let go.
It's hard to let go for
And I
all
think
the,
that, it's hard to go through all the little pieces of the process. And, I'm thinking back to someone I was working with that I wasn't really even looking at the stages of grief. That wasn't what was coming to me at all.
yeah,
I guess on some intuitive or intellectual level, that was what was there, intuitively. But I just could feel like she's not getting angry at anything or anyone, or this just she's not angry enough. I
yeah,
just had to like, have you gotten angry at him? And now he's passed away, this person, but she hadn't, and she needed to because he left her. And he left her on this plane, and they had all these plans, and it doesn't have to make sense, and it won't. But you're feeling that way somewhere, and you can be mad at your kid for not coming into this world, but you got to be mad about it because I know you're mad about it and feel you're mad about it. I'm mad for you. I can't feel you're mad about it. I want to. I'm mad
right.
for you. And I think that we have to process all these little pains that in a lot of ways we've over adulted or adulted over to not be allowed to, or to only access it so much. Or like, I didn't like my haircut recently. I was like, how old is too old to cry about my hair?
Doesn't matter.
But like, it's not too old. It's not. And we have to, get out the guttural everything, and kind of looking at the stages just to know if you've missed something might be a good idea. But it
Yeah,
was just so natural for me to see it in her. And that really opened up a process for the next like couple months where
yeah,
like it helped her pour out more of what was going to hold a being phantom around her.
sure.
It's slowly but surely, and it's never over,
It,
especially when it's coming to death versus the loss of romantic. It really is a different,
yeah,
you know, thing to carry. but also in some ways, deep romantic endings are really hard because they're still here and it's still a death. And to make sense of that is its own whole other topic.
Yes. And, like the song says, breaking up is hard to do. And that is
So
a
hard
good
to
that
do.
is a good place for us to pause there. We will continue our conversation next time, and we'll stream a little bit more into the relationships. But we wanted to give the kind of foundation here for grief in general. So, Katie, thank you for joining me, and audience, thank you so
Yeah.
much for tuning in. This is a labor of love for sure. So, like, comment, subscribe, share our work. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or you just want to show some love, feel free, leave a like, comment in the description here, or whatever, down below, wherever it is. I don't know, depends on what platform you're on. Feel free, send us an email, ginandtantra@gmail.com. Hit us up on Instagram, the Gin and Tantra podcast. I don't know, show some love, man. We appreciate it. For Katie, this is Daniel. We'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.